Good morning, Conference. Nice to see you all here on a Sunday morning. I'd like to welcome you back for our third and final day of Scottish Labour Party Conference 2023. Can I take this opportunity to thank all of you who have contributed so far to making this an incredibly successful weekend and conference, and I'm looking forward to hearing from more of you during this morning's sessions. Your participation and engagement in our debate sessions has shown the richness and passion of our members. Conference, can I ask Eileen Dinning, Chair of the Conference Arrangements Committee, to make her third and final report to Conference?
Morning, Conference. Like Karen, I would first of all like to thank Karen Whitefield for I know the excellent job that she's done chairing this conference this weekend. So thanks very much, Karen. Secondly, and this conference would not be made possible without the staff and the volunteers in this party who make it possible, so thank you as well. And last but not least, all the delegates and the members who have attended conference, spoke in the debates and participated in the fringes. It's what makes this an important motion-based delegate conference. Okay, yesterday's card votes on the constitutional amendments proposed by the Scottish Executive Committee were all carried by conference, and the full details of the results are noted in CAC report number 3. This morning we will have our final debate on the change Scotland needs, as well as a panel on winning the next general election, chaired by an AS and with some of our newly selected candidates. We will also hear from the leader of the Labour Party, Keir Starmer, so please ensure you're all in your seats for 12 ahead of him speaking. We will have a short pause after the winning the next general election panel to allow for all members to be seated and to reset the stage. Once again, and finally, this is the shortest report I've ever done, so there you go. Once again, thank you to all members and delegates for attending conference this weekend. Have a safe journey home, and once rested, get ready for the most important general election that we'll be fighting in a long time. For the third and final time, Chair, I move the CAC report. Thank you.
Thank you, Eileen. Can I ask Conference to accept the report from the CAC? Agreed. Thank you. That's great. Thank you very, very much. Conference, we're now going to have a minute's silence to remember the members who have, our members who have sadly passed away and we have lost in the last year. Can I ask you all to be upstanding? Thank you. Conference, our debate this morning is on the change that Scotland needs, and my goodness, does our country need a change of government both in Edinburgh and London. Before we begin our final debate session, can I give my heartfelt thanks to all of the constituency Labour parties, my brothers and sisters in the trade union movement and the affiliates for bringing all of the motions to conference. And a particular thank you to all of the delegates who have moved, seconded and spoken in our debates this weekend. Just as every other day, copies of the motions to be debated are all detailed in the delegates' report, which was emailed to you last night. They can also be found at, in Appendix 1 of the Conference Arrangements Committee's report at Appendix 3. Delegates, you should have by now collected the ballot packs, but for those of you who are yet to do so, your pack can be collected from the information stand. During this morning's debate, Conference will consider the following motions. Motion 24 on proportional representation, which was submitted by Caithness, Sutherland and Ross CLP, and Composite Motion 7 on constitutional reform, submitted by Cunningham South CLP, Glasgow Kelvin CLP, Glasgow Southside CLP and Moray CLP. I will call each motion one after the other during the debate and invite speakers once all the motions have been moved and seconded. Speakers are welcome to speak on any of the motions moved in the debate session. For delegates moving the motion, a reminder that you have 5 minutes to speak. Seconders have 3 minutes, although I will be happy to accept a formal second from the floor. All delegates speaking in the debate will have a maximum of 4 minutes, and hopefully that will allow us to get a number of contributions from delegates into the debate. Conference, can I now welcome Councillor Brooke Ritchie from East Lothian to open the Change for Scotland Needs debate.
Thanks. As ridiculous as this might sound, my most concrete memory of the last Labour government is a 5-year-old me asking my mother in 2005 if she was going to vote for Tony Blair, whose name I had just heard on the car radio. I would of course later learn of the transformational impact of the policies and values the last Labour government had on my life far beyond that point. But the fact remains that for most of my life, a Labour government was something that I studied in school rather than something that I've experienced in reality. And unfortunately, that is now true for a whole generation. There is almost an entire generation of voters, of prospective voters, that for most, if not all of their lives, they've only ever known an SNP government in Holyrood and a Tory government in Westminster. Cut after cut to local funding, distracted by pet projects and normalising sleaze and dishonesty in politics. This conference has been packed with wonderfully passionate and constructive debates about the difference our party will make for Scotland and how to bring that about. I'm so excited to see how we take these forward, because when we deliver on the change that our health service needs, the change our local communities need, the change our young people need, and as we work together for a greener, safer future, we deliver for Scotland. Now, this morning's debate is on the change that Scotland needs. We have a motion on proportional representation and a composite motion on the constitutional future. For over a decade, the SNP and the Tories have pushed the status quo or separation as the only options available to Scotland. This was always a false choice, and has always been a choice that suited the SNP and the Tories electorally, but it isn't in the interests of Scottish people. It has suited the Tories just as much as the SNP to talk about the Constitution, as they continue to pursue a damaging Brexit deal that not only is damaging our economy, but puts us at conflict with our European partners and now threatens the workers' rights. It is a convenient distraction. And with Nicola Sturgeon's resignation, there has still been no economically coherent plan for independence. While the occupant of Breach House might change, the damaging case for independence will not. Only the Labour Party offers the change that Scotland needs. We can begin this change by giving power back to the people of Scotland, by putting resources into their communities and empowering them to make decisions. People in our communities across Scotland are desperate for change. I am desperate for change. I was elected as a local councillor last May, and every single councillor that I have spoken to and met, and every councillor in this room and beyond, went into this job to make real, positive changes for our communities and to people's lives. The reality is there is so much that we cannot do. We saw Labour councillors in Glasgow walk out of their budget, protesting the SNP Green government cuts to local authority funding, and we see local authorities across the country faced with the awful decision of not whether to cut services or not, but of which services we can afford to save. Never before have councils been asked to do so much with so little. And yet we are told this is the way it must be, that there is no alternative. How untrue that is. Change can happen with a Labour government. A Labour government won't be a government that offers people of Scotland a false choice. A Labour government will transform our community, transform the UK and Scotland. Our determination will not be based on nationalism, but on localism, and making sure that decisions over our lives, over jobs, over treatment, over energy production, and over schools are made as close to the people it affects as possible. For this party, constitutional change isn't the end goal. For this party, constitutional change is the means to empowering communities, tackling economic inequality, and delivering for the people of Scotland. Conference, Scotland needs change, and a Labour government in Westminster and Sue here in Edinburgh can deliver that change. Thanks.
Thank you, Brooke. Can I ask delegates who are moving and seconding motion 24 and composite motion 7 to come forward? And I invite the delegate moving motion 24 to come to the rostrum. I would make conference aware that the Scottish Executive have asked the constituency Labour Party to consider referring this motion back, and you may refer to that in your contribution. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. In 1997, and in the era before we had Labour Connects or social media, I campaigned hard for the referendum for the Scottish Parliament. It was called the Yes Yes campaign at those days, those you remember. And it was a yes for a Parliament and yes for tax-raising powers. Excuse me. And the Parliament we wanted to set up was supposed to be an inclusive place, a place where consensus was sought, etc., and a place where we kind of expected we'd have coalition governments and so on. This motion sought to fulfil Labour's original vision of that for that Parliament, collaborative Parliament, a move away from the Yaboo politics of Westminster, a more stable Parliament without pendulum swings inherent in first past the post. But we've seen with IndyRef and Brexit that single issues can polarise politics straight down the middle, regardless of left and right and so on, ideology. All this motion sought to do was to bring forward a completely fair system, and it was prompted by what's happening with our sister party in Wales, where they're talking about going for a single electoral system for the whole of Wales. Now, I don't agree with what they're talking about, but that was up to them to pick that particular system. Scotland has led the way in so many fields through our Scottish Parliament. As I say, we sought to do this change. I've been asked to remit the motion, and I'm quite happy to do that. All I would ask is that you go away and think about it yourselves, and maybe in your branches and CLPs and your executives and your trade union branches, etc. Have a think about it. Thanks for your forbearance, Chair, and thanks to conference for listening.
Thank you very much. Can I now invite the delegate moving composite 7 to come to the rostrum?
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, comrades. Adam MacDonald, Cunningham South, CLP, moving the composite on constitutional reforms. Conference, our nations are at a crossroads. We have a unique opportunity to shape our future and not to be shaped by it. To do this, we must embrace constitutional reform and ensure all our institutions are fit for the 21st century. The House of Lords is not fit for the 21st century. It is dominated by wealthy landowners and hereditary peers, and it is shown time and time again to be out of touch with the realities of modern life. Conference, it is time the House of Lords was abolished and for a democratic institution to be put in its place. Conference, the future is ours to shape. It's up to us to ensure that it is a future built for the people, by the people and with the people. This means engaging with communities right across Scotland, listening to their concerns and working together to address the challenges we so desperately face. We must reject the notion that the future is something that is simply imposed on us by those in power. Instead, we must embrace the idea that the future is something we create together through responsible collective action and on the picket line. This means creating communities that are diverse and inclusive, where everyone has a voice and a role to play. It means investing in our people and our communities, and it all links back to reforming our constitution, believe it or not, comrades. For too long, too many have told us Scotland, our community's best days are a generation ago. Conference, I know none of us in this room buy that. Our best days, Conference, as an Assar said the other day, lie ahead of us. The future of Scotland is bright. It holds immense potential. Let us embrace the future with confidence and a shared sense of purpose. Conference, it would be wrong for me to move a motion on constitutional reform without mentioning the man who probably made devolution possible, our first ever First Minister, Donald Dewar. In his opening speech to the Scottish Parliament, he said these words: "This is about more than our politics and our laws. This is about who we are, how we carry ourselves." In the quiet moments today, we might hear some echoes from the past. The shout of the welder and the din of the Great Clyde shipyards. They speak of the mearns of its soul and the land. The discourse of the Enlightenment, when Edinburgh and Glasgow were held as a light in the life of Europe. The cry of the great pipes. The past is a part of us, but today there is a new voice in the land, the voice of a democratic parliament, a voice to shape Scotland, a voice for the future. Conference, Dewar's words are true today as they were back then. Before I end my speech, Chair, I want to ask us all a question in this room. Whose side are we on? If we're not on the side of the CW posties taking up the fight against pay cuts and to save their service, whose side are we on? If we're not on the side of nurses who are being fed by food banks, whose side are we on? If we're not on the side of lecturers, UCU members, Unison members taking a stand against principals who are trying to steal their pensions, whose side are we on? If we're not on the side of renters who are taking up the fight against the never-ending greed of landlords, whose side are we on? If we're not on the side of our LGBT plus community who are simply trying to live with dignity, whose side are we on? Conference, if we're not on the side of everyday Scots who are literally giving everything they have simply to get by, whose side are we on? I'll tell you whose side the Scottish Labour Party I grew up knowing is on, and that is the side of working people of Scotland and the trade unions of Scotland. The time for sitting on the fence is over, comrades. The time now is for real solidarity and real reforms, rolling up our sleeves, standing with our trade union brother and sisters, and fighting for a better future. It's time for the Labour Party, our Labour Party, to be unapologetically socialist, unapologetically on the side of our trade unions, unapologetically on the side of the people of Scotland. It's time we remember the reason our party exists, because working people across our lands came together in the belief that an injury to one is an injury to all. And Conference, we do that by making parliaments, councils and every institution work for the working people of Scotland. Chair, I am happy to move the motion.
Thank you. Can I now invite the delegate seconding Composite Motion 7 to come to the rostrum?
Chair, Conference, Peter Duffy, Glasgow, Kelvin, CLP. Conference, I want to start by picking up on something that Anas said in his address to Conference on Friday. He said that we have a message to SNP voters, and that message is that we understand your desire for change. And I think there's two parts to that, Conference, that we need to unpick and we need to take to heart. The first part is that we absolutely need to connect with those SNP voters, with those voters who have a desire for independence. And we need to recognise, the second part, we need to recognise that that desire for independence is built upon a desire for real, substantive, transformative change in our society. And I was reminded of a conversation that I had with a friend and colleague back at the time of the independence referendum. Call him Scott, because that was his name, still is his name. Scott's a young working class guy from Castlemilk. He would have having a debate in the office going back and forward about independence. He was a big Indie voter, and he said to me, look, Peter, supporting independence doesn't mean supporting the SNP. Once we get independence, we can bin the SNP and we can elect a government that gives us the radical redistributive politics that I've heard you talk about. Well, Conference, we all know what happened. Independence was defeated, at least temporarily, and Scott joined the SNP the next day. And then began the SNP's, decade-long confidence trick of saying, well, we cannot deliver the change that our people desire because our hands are tied by the Westminster system. Well, Conference, we know that that's a lie. And Ros Foyer, in her address to Conference on Friday, laid out and gave final lines to that lie when she pointed to STUC research that shows that using the existing Scottish Government powers, they could raise between £3 and £5 billion a year. Conference, think of how much that could deliver change to our communities. But going back to Anas's first point, we need to reach out to independence voters and we need to engage with them where they are in our societies. And we need to do that in partnership with our comrades in the STUC and the trade union movement. We need to talk to people in civic society right throughout Scotland. I need to have a message that I can take back to Scott. And maybe that message is that, maybe, Scott, the desire that you have for change is not going to be delivered via independence. And maybe it's not going to be delivered by the United Kingdom as it's currently constituted. Maybe we need to have some changes as laid out in this motion. And maybe when we have that Conversations Conference, maybe we open up an avenue to start to discuss the type of transformative, redistributive, democratic, socialist policies that really will deliver on that desire for change and, dare I say it, on the change that Scotland needs. Thank you, Conference.
Thank you to delegates for moving and seconding these motions. Can I now ask delegates who wish to speak in the debate session to raise their hands? I'm going to take the woman, Susan, the gentleman in the front row, and the man who's almost standing up, and you should have a second round of speakers. I remind you, you've got 4 minutes to speak in the debate.
Thank you. Conference, Susan King, Glasgow Southside CLP, proud to represent Glasgow and Central Scotland members on the SEC. I'm proud to speak to Composite Motion 7 on constitutional reform. As a party and a movement, we recognise that across Scotland and the UK, people are hungry for change. People feel disconnected and left behind by today's politics. That's because both governments, the Tories in Westminster and the SNP in Holyrood, refuse to focus on the priorities of the people. The Tories have shown they will stop at nothing to implement a disastrous hard Brexit and are now coming after workers' rights. The SNP have failed in every single area of our public sector. Waiting lists longer than ever before, backlogs in courts, schools struggling to buy daughters, and public sector pay demands snubbed. On Wednesday, out of the blue, it was announced that there will be a new leader of the SNP and First Minister. There will be change at the top of Scottish politics. But Conference, what won't change is a Scottish Nationalist Party intent on dividing Scotland in its conquest for independence. No matter who the next leader of the SNP is, the facts will not change. Independence will harm wages, harm mortgages, harm pensions, and set Scotland back. But everyone in this hall shares the real priorities of the people. That's why it's only the Labour Party that will end the division we've had in Scotland for so long and implement the change Scotland needs. Yes, our political institutions are far from perfect. Westminster needs reformed, Holyrood needs reformed, and yes, Conference, the House of Lords needs abolished. But we can achieve change by we can't achieve change by dividing communities like the Tories do or holding divisive referendums like the SNP do. We achieve change by bringing power closer to the people, and we ensure that Donald Dure's vision of a parliament that will be full of debate and passion with MPs working together in the pursuit of social justice. And thanks to Gordon Brown, we now have a blueprint for that change. Conference, this motion welcomes the reforms proposed by the Commission on the UK's future, which will have power move away from the centralised UK parliaments, strengthen devolution and give local economies the powers and resources they need. We now have the opportunity to make this part of our offer to voters at the next general election. The Labour movement, with our trade union allies, can lead the way on delivering the reform our country needs. Under the SNP and Tories, our country has been held back. Too many people have lost faith in politics and its ability to improve lives. But we are ready for government, which gives us the opportunity to renew our democracy. Only Labour can boot the Tories out of Downing Street. We can deliver change across the UK with a majority Labour government led by Keir Starmer. In Conference, we can deliver the change Scotland needs by getting my friend Anas Sarwar elected as First Minister. Through the vision put forward by Gordon Brown, Labour can deliver a stronger Scotland and a transformed UK. I urge Conference to support the composite motion. Thank you.
Sacha Bryden, Aberdeenshire West, CLP. Bear with me, this speech was written very hastily at 2 a.m. I'll get started talking a wee bit about regional alienation within Scotland and then talk about a few other things. I'm speaking in opposition to the constitutional reform motion. Aberdeenshire is a forgotten corner of our country, well, by all parties, really. Make no mistake in saying it. In November 2021, 80,000 people were without power for a week. Nothing from Holyrood. We heard nothing. And bear in mind, Aberdeenshire only has 260,000 people. The only government that actually showed any interest in Aberdeenshire when we had no power was the UK government, not Holyrood. I would rather a strong centralist UK government led by Keir Starmer, who could probably properly utilise the considerable powers of the British state under our system of parliamentary supremacy. However, the power of any future UK government would be considerably weakened by these plans, which would devolve inequality across the United Kingdom depending on the politics of a particular region. The present House of Lords, okay, I have disagreements with its appointment system, but it fulfills Bagehot's assessment of a house of respected revisers. Removing the Lords and replacing them with elected senators, or indeed whatever other plan, would significantly weaken the elected Commons by forcing it to compete with a definitively legislative second chamber. Within the Lords Spiritual provide a useful safeguard against assisted dying, which, as we're seeing from the utterly grotesque policy in Canada, would be devastating. And I personally, I know you'll all disagree with this, but I would personally see more bishops in the Lords. And I'll finish by saying, since all these plans eventually come back to the monarchy, the structure of the United Kingdom, the place of the first and second estates assembled in the Lords, I'll finish by paraphrasing George Lansbury, which is probably not a name you expected to hear, and Clement Attlee, in saying, "It is capitalism that makes people poor, not the Constitution."
Good morning, everyone. Douglas McAllister from Clydebank and Mulgai, CLP. Conference, the next general election could be barely a year away. After 13 disastrous years of Tory government, this long national disgrace could be nearing its end. And I am absolutely determined to play my part as our parliamentary candidate for Western Bartonshire. But between now and then, we have work to do, because we know the SNP cannot get rid of the Tories. The SNP won't replace them. Only a vote for the Labour Party can do that. But, Conference, we know it isn't enough for the SNP and Tories to deserve to lose. We need to deserve to win. And, Conference, we have a lot to offer. We know that Labour governments are in the business of reform and delivering positive change. The Commission on the UK's Future, led by Gordon Brown, has given a blueprint for how a future Labour government can and will reform the UK. It will push power out from Westminster, empowering our nations and regions to do much more with the resources we have available to us as a country. A Labour government can reform our institutions, abolishing the House of Lords and the corrupt atmosphere that comes with it. And it will reform our economy, boosting local prosperity and making sure that instead of only ever shouldering the pain with its fails, people across our country truly feel the growth when our economy does well, because that's the change that Scotland needs. And, Conference, just as we should expect more of Westminster, we should expect much more of Holyrood too. Our Scottish Parliament is a great Labour innovation, but the SNP are not treating it with the respect it deserves. We want to see a reformed Holyrood with the power to actually hold ministers to account, to investigate freely and without government interference, and to have the same rights of free speech as the Westminster Parliament. But Scottish Labour won't stop there. We also want to push power out of Holyrood. Our communities have been starved by a decade of SNP cuts and centralisation, but Scottish Labour will deliver new, fair funding settlements to our local authorities, and we would empower local people to hold public bodies to account, giving them the justice they deserve. Conference, that's the change that Scotland needs. Deep reforms at Westminster, more powers at Holyrood, and more power for your communities. It's all on the ballot in the coming years with a vote for Scottish Labour. So let's make it happen. Thank you.
Can I have an indication of others who would like to speak in the debate? Patricia, Stephen and the guy at the end. The man with the holding.
Chair Conference, Patricia Ferguson, delegate from Anisan CLP and candidate for Glasgow North West. hope they're all the people that are coming to help campaign, Karen, by the way. As we meet today, our country is experiencing a cost of living crisis. Workers are on strike across the public sector, our NHS is struggling, and our local authorities are facing budget cuts which will decimate local services. Meanwhile, the Conservative government at Westminster blames the war in Ukraine for all our problems and seems to think that we won't remember that it was their handling of the economy, particularly under Liz Truss, that is largely responsible for the state of our economy now. Of course, they refused to negotiate with trade unions, instead pushing through anti-strike legislation. But the Tories are also responsible for the corruption of our politics, ignoring the rules we all had to follow during the pandemic and giving out lucrative contracts to their friends and donors. They have made politicians and politics look cheap and venal. In Scotland, the SNP blames Westminster for all the problems that they have, even in areas that are entirely devolved, like the tragedy of delayed discharge or their consistent failure to meet NHS targets. But we know, Conference, it doesn't have to be like this. A Labour government would invest in sustainable energy and levy a windfall tax on the energy companies. We would repeal the anti-strike legislation and bring in a new deal for workers and working people. And we would reform the Constitution, abolishing the House of Lords and empowering people at local levels to an extent that we've never seen before. Conference, a strong progressive Labour government would give a lie to the SNP assertion that only independence can make life better for Scots. Now, speaking of the SNP, my constituency, like many others, currently has an SNP MP. I won't mention her name, but you've probably never heard of it anyway, so it doesn't really matter. But at a hustings in 2019, she was asked, as all the candidates were, what she wanted her legacy to be at the end of the 5-year term of that Parliament. She said that she wanted her legacy to be that she was the last ever MP for Glasgow North West. Chair, I intend to ensure that she is the last SNP MP for Glasgow North West. And our job is to take out these MPs who think that ideology matters more than the people they are there to represent, because those people matter more than any ideology that they can dream up. Only a Labour government will begin to make those changes that our people and our communities really need. It's our job to deliver that Labour government, and it's our job to deliver that change. Thank you, Conference.
Right, Chris Boyne, Falkirk West, CLP, first time attending Conference and first time speaking. So, I'd like to begin with a statement that may make some of our older comrades here begin to feel their age a bit. In 2014, at the time of the referendum, I was at the grand old age of 10 years old. So I've grown up in a Scotland where this yes-no debate has loomed large over our politics, our society, the way things operate up here. And the simple fact is that this hasn't just come out of nowhere. It comes from a deep discontent with the institutions of our country that aren't working for ordinary people, because they weren't designed to work for ordinary people. And we see this in the independence movement, and we saw it in the Brexit referendum. It's an anger pointed at these institutions which have failed us. And it's our mission in the Scottish Labour Party to provide the solution. The solution isn't a failed status quo under which 1 in 4 Scottish children are living in poverty. That's not a system that's working. But at the same time, the solution isn't the proposed independence of the Scottish National Party which would only make those conditions worse for the poorest people in our country. So, as a member of this party, and as more importantly as a citizen of this country, I welcomed the report by the Commission on the Future of the UK, chaired by former Prime Minister Gordon Brown. This report makes a number of important... I've lost my place, give me a minute. Important contributions to the argument around how we strengthen our democracy in this country. The commitment to the abolition of the replacement of the archaic House of Lords and the call to bring real power to our local communities, not to manage decline, but to make a proper change. However, I think it's important to say that this report can't be seen as the end point. Instead, it has to be seen as the beginning to how we change our country for the better. We must fight for real reform of our electoral system, to realise the promise of democracy and to truly make every vote equal in this country. And I'm going to finish on this point. As we discuss reform of this broken British state, and as we argue for a fairer, more equal and more democratic Britain, we must be prepared to criticise the corrupt, classist and profoundly ridiculous institution that is the monarchy.
Chair, Conference, Stephen Lowe, Unison Scotland. I have to say, was not intending to speak in this debate until the somewhat brave contribution from Aberdeenshire, and I felt it was incumbent on somebody to come up here and bash the bishops, because the comrade is right. Constitutional change is not social change. However, we as a movement should always be for democracy and against patronage. And that's the key fundamental in reform in the House of Lords. The motion calls for a variety of bodies, Civic Scotland or Civic Society, convened by the STUC to sort of work on what powers the Scottish Parliament wants. And that is a good way of looking at things. However, we have to remember that increasingly in Scotland, well, classically, ancient Rome, you had the idea of civil society, which was that part of society not involved with the state. We've replaced that with Civic Scotland, which is that part of society grant-funded by the state. And that is having a very distorting impact on our public life. And one of the things, and that has happened while the SNP have ran down the powers and capacity of local government is no coincidence. So, as part of our democratic renewal, we need to challenge the Quango state. And I'll just mention the National Care Service, supposedly, because that's Quango's big style. We need to challenge that and rebuild democracy from the bottom up, fundamentally, by empowering local government. And, and finally, democracy and challenging the idea of nation against nation should also be, we want constitutional reform, not because we're Scottish, but because we're Democrats. Whether some people are very keen on union flags, some people are very keen on saltires, but there's a similarity in them both, which is you can't feed your wains with a flag.
Thank you, Stephen. I'm going to allow one more speaker into the debate, and it's the delegate from Moray, since they were part of the composite CLPs who composited in this debate.
Well, thank you, Chair. I'll be speaking for the composite motion. Good morning, Conference. I do hope you're all well. My name is Ben Williams, Councillor for Fochabers Lambride, Youth Officer of Moray Labour. Thank you. Youth Officer of Murray Labour, and first-time Speaker. Before any of that, though, I'm somebody like everyone in this room who wants change. That's why we're here. We can see it there. We have to deliver change. And what I've seen this weekend is that we believe we can. We believe there will be a Labour government. I'm going to let you in on a secret, though. The Tories, they believe this as well. I know. And so their response hasn't been to make life better for anyone. No, they wouldn't do that. Their response has been to try and disenfranchise younger and working-class voters so that they can hold on to power. Well, Conference, obviously we have to oppose this. We believe in democracy, and therefore we must oppose the disenfranchisement of younger and working-class voters by the Tories. Likewise, we mustn't do what the Tories have done with their levelling up agenda, which is pitting communities against communities to secure the resources that we all need. Instead, what we have to do is campaign for the redistribution of power so that everyone, no matter where they're from, no matter the circumstances of their upbringing, has a say and a chance to succeed in this country. It is clear that the people of Scotland and the UK are ready for change, and only the Labour Party is ready to lead the way by delivering that change. So let's work together to make this vision a reality by agreeing this motion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and thank you to all the delegates who spoke in the debate. Can I now ask Sarah Boyack, Shadow Cabinet Secretary for the Constitution, External Affairs and Culture, to close the debate?
Thank you very much, Chair. Conference, I am absolutely delighted to speak to you in our beautiful capital city of Edinburgh, and it's a privilege to represent this area in our Parliament. But unfortunately, we meet a time when I cannot remember things being so bad for my constituents. The issues facing my constituents here in Edinburgh and the Lothians will be recognisable to you all across Scotland. A lack of affordable housing is pricing people out of the housing market. We're seeing rising numbers of people hit by rocketing rents, people being stuck in housing that doesn't meet their needs, and increasing numbers of people being made homeless. We've got waiting times for accident emergency departments and treatment times longer than they have been in decades, and fewer opportunities. Conference, there are more women in Edinburgh that are now on out-of-work benefits when you compare it with 1997 when Labour came to power. So we need change, and we need more opportunities. And one of the things that's been quite interesting today is there's a bit of a kind of intergenerational flavour going on in the room when people first got interested in politics, what they remember from that. A member of my team came across a speech that I made to Scottish Labour Conference in 1996. Now, I am not going to tell you how old I was then, but what I can tell you is that my speech was about protecting our local authorities from being treated with disrespect by Tory MP Michael Forsyth and having their budgets cut by a Tory government. And our councillors in the next couple of weeks are facing really difficult choices, and they're facing tough choices on how to balance their budgets across Scotland because the SNP Green government is ring-fencing their services. But we've got to be clear, this is after a decade of SNP cuts. £1 billion has been cut from our local authorities, and that is not acceptable. That is hitting our communities. And without enough cash to pay for our services that our local communities need, I am angry that 27 years on, I have to be making exactly the same case, demanding a fair deal for our councils so they can invest in our local communities. We need that change, Conference, and we've got two bad governments. The issues that the SNP and the Tories in government should be focused on are health, jobs, education, the cost of living and our climate crisis. but one is focused on independence and the other is focused on Brexit. And only our party, the Scottish Labour Party, offers the change that Scotland needs. So today we've had a good debate, and it is the Labour Party, so we've got a good range of views in here. And what we need to do is to take this debate forward. We need to make it clear that the Labour Party will implement change in Westminster, in Holyrood and in our communities. And I want to thank Brooke Ritchie for kicking off our discussion today. She is a fantastic councillor for Preston, Seaton and Gosford. And I want to thank all of you who made your contributions in today's debates. We need to be proud, Conference. We need to be really proud that it was us that established our Scottish Parliament. But 2 decades on, we urgently need reform. We urgently need change to push power out of the centre right across the UK. The Tories have trashed our economy, and they have made it clear that they are the biggest threat to our union of nations and regions. And Brexit was always going to be bad, but the Tories have damaged our relationships with our European neighbours, and they've destroyed the trading certainty and the environmental standards that our producers urgently need fixed. And with Nicola Sturgeon's resignation, the SNP's latest plan to achieve independence and their special conference, you can just have to look at them. It's going to end in the way that all their other tactics have ended, in failure. So only our party is the party with a clear offer to the people of Scotland, an offer that acknowledges that there is no majority for independence, but there's also no majority for the status quo, and we need change. And while the SNP and the Tories continue to try to force Scotland into a binary choice, it is only our party that will end the division. And to end that division, we need to look outwards, to work with our trade union colleagues and civil society to achieve the change we need for our communities and deliver the jobs, the decent jobs, right across Scotland we need. And that's why I was absolutely delighted when last summer Keir Starmer asked Gordon Brown to lead a commission on the Constitution. And last summer, under the leadership of Anas Sarwar, we worked on proposals to recommend change. Better government for the UK, transforming relations between our nations and regions, a stronger Scottish Parliament, reformed to hold the government to account, and empowering our communities to reverse the SNP's years of power grabbing and centralisation. And I think what our debate has shown today is that our party has the solutions now that Scotland needs. Because Labour in power has always secured constitutional reform alongside the economic and the social reform that our families, our citizens and our businesses need if they're going to succeed. That is exactly what we did in 1997, because we invested in economic and public services. We looked at the reform to change everybody's lives, to give them the opportunities in our communities, and we redistributed wealth from the richest to the poorest. And at the same time, we secured the popular support to establish our Scottish Parliament. Now, Gordon Brown's commission shows how we can make that change. It's radical change, and it's radical change that the next Labour manifesto will implement. So let's look at that change, abolishing the House of Lords and creating an assembly of nations and regions which will be democratically elected and which better reflects right across the United Kingdom. And protecting our constitutional settlement has been absolutely key to that. Because if you look at what the Tories have done, they have undermined devolution. They ride roughshod over devolution. Sometimes they're not even aware of it, and that is not acceptable. So our Assembly of the Nations and Regions will play an essential role in protecting our constitutional settlement. And in establishing a directly elected Assembly, the next Labour government will entrench devolution, and that is absolutely vital. And that will ensure that no UK government can ever undermine our devolution settlement. But we'll also make change how governments work together. We will put cooperation at the heart of our constitutional settlement. We'd create a Council of Nations and Regions to replace the joint ministerial committees, which frankly have been abandoned by the SNP and the Tories. And we'd ensure that they would be transparent, that there would be an independent secretariat which will transform intergovernment relations, so that no one government can ride roughshod over the others. There needs to be equality. And that means that our nations and our regions across Scotland and the UK would be having a voice at the table. That means power is going to be shared genuinely. A key issue we've also decided has to be at the top of our priorities is strengthening economic rights. And that means that putting that work is going to be at the centre of the nations and regions' work. It has to be a shared responsibility right across the UK to ensure that workers always get the protection that they need. And it would also ensure that the Scottish Government is involved. So when we're doing things like setting the minimum wage, we have a voice at the table in Scotland too. That's critical. And finally, and we've been talking about it in this debate this morning, we need to make sure that we empower our communities and our councils to give our councils the powers they need. That is absolutely critical. And double devolution will drive the change that Labour wants to ensure that power is closer to our communities. It's not held, it's not centralised, and we're not seeing our council budgets ripped apart or told exactly how they have to spend their money. So we need to make sure that we return to an era where our local councillors and our local councils are respected. And that's why UK and Scottish Labour governments are needed to respect that vital role, to transform our local communities, to tackle economic inequality, to tackle poverty, but also to tackle the climate crisis at the same time, because that could never be more important. So Labour governments would empower our councils and treat them as partners. And Conference, we are clear that Labour's constitutional offer will not stop at Westminster, because as several speakers have identified today, the change that Scotland needs also needs to extend to our Scottish Parliament. When I was elected alongside 55 other Labour MSPs in 1999, we were passionate about delivering social justice and transforming Scotland. But under the SNP, we have gone backwards. People are increasingly unhappy with what the SNP are doing. They are failing as a government, and they are not using the full powers of our Parliament. That is not acceptable. But you only have to look back to the ferry scandal to see that they will go to great lengths to avoid public transparency and to hide the decisions they've made, not just from the public, but from directly elected MSPs in our Scottish Parliament. And that is not acceptable, Conference. That needs to change, and Labour will bring about that change. And that's why, under Anas's leadership last summer, we set out our key arguments for the change that Scotland needs. And we actually identified, we've started to work with communities, we're networking with the third sector, working with the trade unions. We want to work with everybody to bring support for our agenda for change. We need to push power out of the centre, to empower our communities and make sure that that power is used to empower and to improve people's lives. And Labour's constitutional offer is not a binary choice like you have from the SNP or the Tories. It's meaningful change. So the House of Lords to our town halls, that will see real change, and it will mean that politicians are having to deliver for people. So Conference, this is up to us. Let us make sure that we elect Keir Starmer as our Prime Minister in number 10. Let's make sure that we elect Anas Sarwar to Butte House so that we can make the radical constitutional change that will transform our country for the better. That is the change that Scotland needs, and we need it now. So let's work together when we leave this conference to make sure it happens, to support our communities and to give our constituents and everybody in Scotland the opportunities that they urgently need. Let's do it together. Thank you, Conference.
Thank you, Sarah, for your contribution in winding up our debate. Conference, we're now going to move to voting on the motions that were before us. You'll be aware that motion 24 has been referred back with the agreement of the constituency Labour Party. The vote on composite motion 7 will be taken by a show of hands, and if I can't determine clearly the outcome of the vote, we'll need to move to a card vote. As a reminder, you can find the exact wording of the motion in this morning's CAC report at Appendix 1. So can I ask all those in favour of Composite Motion 7 on constitutional reform submitted by Cunningham South CLP, Glasgow Kelvin CLP, Glasgow Southside CLP and Moray CLP to raise their hands? Okay. And anyone against? Not quite unanimous, but almost there. Thank you very much, Conference. We're now going to have a changeover of our SEC, but also, whilst they're doing that, we're going to watch a short party political broadcast from our party.
Believe this is our moment to build a country where everyone is entitled to dignity. This is our opportunity to set our country back on the path to prosperity. This is our chance to help everyone achieve their potential. The time for divide and rule is over. The time for change is now. Labour will deliver that change and will build a better future, and we'll do it together.
The last year has been the toughest in living memory for many Scots. Thousands have felt the impossible choice of choosing between heating and eating. After 13 years of a Tory government, our public services have been ran into the ground and our economy has crashed. After 5 Prime Ministers, it's now clear that we must get rid of this economically illiterate, morally bankrupt Tory government. And here in Scotland, our NHS is in crisis. People waiting now longer than ever before. Record long waits at A&E. 1 in 7 Scots on an NHS waiting list, and ambulances queued outside even to get into accident and emergency departments. Our patients and staff deserve so much better. And while the queues grow for our NHS, the SNP are more focused on stoking division than taking responsibility. Across the country, people are frustrated with politicians more interested in their own agendas than working for the public. 2 governments that want to top down our ambitions and expect you to accept the unacceptable. But this isn't as good as it gets. Change is possible. Our best days do lie ahead. We can tackle the cost of living crisis by investing in our communities. We can save our NHS by listening to frontline NHS workers and putting patients first. We can make Scotland the best place to grow up in, live in and to do business in. For too long, politicians have wanted to focus on their priorities, not your priorities. But under my leadership, Scottish Labour will always put you first. We can put ambition and optimism about our country back at the heart of our politics. Together we can put the Tories out of Downing Street and elect a Labour government under Keir Starmer that will put people and doing the right thing first. For too long, our economy, our public services and our communities have suffered from the politics of the Tories and the SNP. But that can change. Scotland has extraordinary potential, just waiting to be unlocked. Scotland needs change, new ideas and new energy. Scottish Labour, the change that Scotland needs.
Conference, I would like to now move to the next item on our agenda. Our winning the next general election panel. Can I now welcome Anas Sarwar, leader of the Scottish Labour Party, and some of our newly selected candidates, Kirsty McNeill, Torquil Crichton, Joni Reid and Douglas Alexander.
Thank you so much, Karen, and thank you all. I hope it wasn't too late a night last night, so not too rough on this Sunday morning. As you can see, the focus of our conference has been all about the future and all about change. And part of that change is making sure we are electing the Labour MPs in Scotland to deliver a majority Labour government across the UK. And I am so honoured to be sharing the stage with just 4 of, I hope, many new Scottish Labour MPs come the next general election. So let's give them all a really big cheer. We've selected 11 candidates. I'm going to get a shout out for the candidates that are not on the stage as well. I think you've heard from most, if not all of them, at different points over the course of the conference. So let's give a shout out to Patricia Ferguson, standing in Glasgow North West. To Martin Rhodes in Glasgow North. Douglas McAllister in Western Barnshire. Lorna Dougal in Eastern Barnshire. Dr Zubir Ahmed in Glasgow South West. Roisin McKenna in Glasgow Central. And last but not least, Gordon McKee in Glasgow South. And now that I've got all the cheap applause lines, we turn to the conversation. Yourself, Kirsty, you have obviously been really heavily involved with Save the Children, but also in international development for many, many years. You have seen the difference we can make in terms of alleviating poverty. What's driven you to go from that third sector international development role to actually thinking about elected politics and the power of government?
So somebody actually during the selection said to me, the thing about what you do is it's important and you obviously do it well, but it's finger in the dike stuff. And it's true. So at Save the Children, we're obviously responding to the recent earthquake. We respond to lethal poverty in the world wherever we find it. But there's nothing that a charity can do, there's nothing that a third sector organisation can do that will ever make as big a difference as Labour and government does. So when we tripled the aid budget, UK Aid used to save a child's life every 2 minutes through support to immunisation, which means every single person in this room has already saved lives today before you've even had your lunch. We used to have in the Cabinet, and Douglas, as Secretary of State for International Development, we used to have in the Cabinet a lifesaver in chief in the Cabinet, and that's the difference that a Labour government makes. And it just happens at a speed and a scale that's just impossible for the third sector. And if you're a supporter of a charity like Save the Children, I can't tell you how grateful we are, but you'll make a bigger difference by being a supporter of that next Labour government.
Fantastic. And just on that, Douglas, as Kirsty has rightly said, you led for us in government around international development, and we literally helped lift hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people out of poverty right around the world. You did that in government, and you and I both shared the pain of that night of 2015. And many people will think, actually, when you leave politics, you go and you look 10 years younger coming back, and you do look 10 years younger coming back. It's having gone away from politics and having done really successful things outside of politics. Professor, of course, at Harvard, having your own radio show at one point as well. What motivated you and energized you to, having gone out of politics, having achieved really successful things in politics, to now want to come back and serve again?
Because I fundamentally believe that change is coming, and you and Jackie deserve a huge amount of credit for the work that you've done to bring us back here in Scotland. And I think that combination of yourself and us, who were going to work to make First Minister, and Keir Starmer, who are going to work to make Prime Minister, means the story about Scottish politics is going to change. And there's really been, for the last 10, 12 years since we lost our seats, a long time ago now, a story that says Labour can never win, the Tories will always win, Britain can never change. That story's never been less true than it is today. And in that sense, I've had a very blessed life in the last few years. I've taught some of the great universities in the world. I've watched my kids grow up. But politics matters. It matters fundamentally, not just because public service matters, but because when you are sitting in government, you wake up in the morning and you say, not what am I going to say today, but what am I going to do today? And the fact that we were in government able to tackle poverty in communities across Scotland and across the UK and internationally, it wasn't a matter of chance. It was a matter of choice. It was Labour values that made us make those choices. And so if I can play a small part by making sure that East Lothian is a Labour gain, that feels like a very, very worthwhile use of my time.
Excellent, excellent. Well, we're going to make sure proper use of that time between now and the next general election. Joni, like me, you've got a family background in politics, and people might not know this, but your grandfather and my father were very, very close friends indeed. How has that family history shaped your own politics and given you that enthusiasm to want to stand and deliver for Labour and your local community?
Yeah, well, when I was a kid, I thought that what you did on a Saturday, went on a march, and then I realised all my pals were at the park. I wasn't very happy. But of course, in 92 and 97, our families were fighting for a Labour government that we needed to clear up the mess that the Tories had left. And now we are having to do the same, and I think the mess is even greater and deeper than it's ever been, because it is the worst Tory government that we have ever had. And the task is going to be enormous. But the only way that we can rebuild those communities is through a Labour government. The only way that we can protect our precious institutions, the only way that we can deliver fair pay and all the values that we really believe in is through a Labour government. So we're just doing the cycle, isn't it? The Tories make a mess of things, we have to come in and pick it up, and that's what we're having to do this time, and that's why I want to stand.
Excellent. Thank you, Joni. One of my childhood memories, Joni, is having to go to your granddad's house. I used to call him Uncle Jimmy. Yeah. And he used to have the biggest dog I could ever remember.
It wasn't mass, it was tiny.
Honestly, and to this day, I still have a fear of dogs having to go to Uncle Jimmy's house.
Bess, she was lovely, she was lovely.
Torquil, you've obviously looked at politics from the other side, having been a frontline journalist. I won't say how many years, because you're obviously one of our new young candidates in this general election campaign. But having reported on politics, and having reported specifically on Labour politics, obviously being at the Daily Record, how does it feel now to have done the switch from being not a reporter of politicians, but actually being a politician yourself?
Yeah, it's through the looking glass, isn't it? I mean, I've been in journalism for as long as Nicola Sturgeon was in politics. We're like two speeding trains. She's on the way out, we're on the way up. And I started in journalism a long, long time ago. You know, I'm not as young as I look. I started the West Highland Free Press under Brian Wilson and the late Ian McCormack. And the slogan we had in the masthead that's still on the Free Press is the land, the language, and the people. And that's what we did. It was a very radical, still is a very radical newspaper. We campaigned on that. And you had a direct connection with the readers, and you felt you changed on land reform, on language development, and changing people's lives. We had a direct effect. And then as the years pass and you reach the lofty heights of the Westminster lobby, I just felt your journalism became less effective. Sure, you're up close to it, you see it happening, it unravels in front of you, but really you're just throwing stones into the river. You're not changing the course of the river the way you used to with my old journalism. And then a couple of things happened, but one of the things happened was the fall of Kabul, strangely enough. And Dominic Raab wasn't the only person on holiday when Kabul fell. I was on holiday in the Western Isles. And on a single track road there, I met the Norgroves, John and Lorna Norgrove, who lost their daughter Linda in Afghanistan in 2012 and set up an educational charity, the Norgrove Foundation. And they were in trouble because they had two aid workers in Kabul, two Haziri women and their families who couldn't get out. And they stopped me in the road and said, "Can you help?" I said, "I'll do what I can." So I got up the next morning and wrote to everyone I knew, and because you're in Westminster politics, you know politicians. And well, long story short, they got out. They got out. First of all, they didn't get out. There was a bomb at the airport. They were sent back. We got a text. They're not going to make it. And then a text back from somebody in government saying they will make it. And then a Friday night text. They're out. And quite emotional, to change people's lives like that, or just have a role on the edge of changing people's lives, I thought, that's what I used to do. That's what I want to do. And then just a case of asking Patsy, my partner, if I could do it, because you can't do this on your own. I think everyone will learn that. And then it was a case of heading north, heading back to home, and doing it.
Fantastic.
Oh, that's why I'm
Well, I know we're all really excited about the Torquil Crichton versus Angus MacNeil fight in Western Isles. It's truly a story of local boy gone bad versus local boy come good. So we'll all be looking forward to the Western Isles election and seeing you as the new MP. Kirsty, one of the, as well as your work in international development and for the third sector, you're also one of the leading thinkers in UK politics. You've obviously written a paper for, I believe, for the Fabians around confronting culture wars. And we've got a UK government now that clearly wants to fight the next general election on culture wars. And you helped write a blueprint about how we confront that. Do you want to set that a bit more detail about that big challenge we face around that potential culture war election and what lessons we as a Scottish Labour Party can learn from that?
So one of the reasons I felt called to write this is it became clearer and clearer, and in my day job I work on really divisive issues, right? So we work on welfare reform, refugee rights, international aid, a lot of stuff that has a lot of heat in it and a lot of anger. And it became increasingly clear that that anger was getting weaponised and used by our political opponents. And be in no doubt, both of Scotland's governments have a strategy that is predicated on stoking anger, stoking grievance, and trying to turn people against one another. It's a sort of politics of zero sum, that if someone is doing well, that means someone else has to be doing badly. And it's a politics predicated on telling people that they're doing badly because someone else is doing well at their expense. And be in no doubt, it's going to get much worse before it gets better, because both Scotland's governments are desperate. They are desperate because they cannot go into the general election fighting on their record. It is impossible for them to point to things that they've achieved for Scottish people. And so this kind of politics of anger is so corrosive of our society, but it's deeply damaging for the left in particular, and it's damaging for three reasons. Because it distracts us. It distracts us from talking about the things that really matter, saving public services, getting an economy that works for working people, dealing with the climate emergency. It distracts us from those really important questions. Secondly, it divides us, and in this hall we know that, right? That some of these fights that have been stoked have divided us from one another, and they've divided us from our communities. And thirdly, it demoralises us. Like any of you that have ever tried to have a conversation about Scotland's future on social media will know social media has become a sewer, an absolute sewer. And it means that those of us who've got ideas about the future, who are progressive, who want to talk about how we can cooperate and unify, we just withdraw because it's too damn hard. But be in no mistake, that is a strategy. That's not coming from nowhere. That's coming because those two political parties, in the SNP and the Conservatives, want it to be that way. And that means we've all got a choice in this room. We have all got a choice about whether we think we're here to win a culture war or here to end a culture war. And what we laid out in the blueprint is actually we can go into that election with a strategy that says we're going to build a movement that is bigger and more inclusive than ever before. We're going to renew our democracy with some of the reforms about the House of Lords and so on. We are all going to, as individuals, choose to engage differently and respectfully. And Anas, I think you modelled that for all of us this week with the kind of grace with which you talked about her record, such as it is. But also, crucially, we've all got a choice about whether we come up with an economic prospectus that is sufficiently radical and sufficiently inclusive that people genuinely believe it doesn't have to be like this. Because the reason they retreat into thinking about their identity and thinking about division is because they think this is as good as it gets. And you on Friday, and I know Keir later today, is going to give us that economic prospectus, something worth fighting for and something worth rallying behind and crucially unifying around. Because one of my mantras and a lot of the work I do on division is we don't have to agree about everything. We're not going to agree about everything, but we have to find ways to agree about more. And what you did on Friday was give us a list of policies that we can rally behind and go out on the doorstep and say, this is not as good as it gets. It is going to get better because change is coming.
Thank you, Kirsty. And Douglas, one of the mistakes I think political parties can make is focus entirely on the election and then the day after the election think, okay, what the hell do we do now? And so making sure, particularly from a 2026 perspective, we have a Labour government going in and delivering for Scotland ahead of a Scottish Parliament election in 2026. Any reflections on that process of transitioning from being the party of opposition saying make us the government to then being the government? Any lessons and thoughts on that?
Well, it means in 2026, hopefully your job will change from being persuasion to being implementation and delivery. And as I look back on the equivalent transition, I was working with Gordon Brown at the time, 94, 95, 96. One of the stories that never got written about 1997 was that Labour cabinet members, Gordon Brown and others, and the Prime Minister, Tony Blair, when they got to Whitehall, weren't sure what they're doing. That was the dog that never barked. Now, as I look back at it, I think, why, without any government experience, neither of them had served in government before, did they hit the ground running and know exactly what to do? And honestly, I think that's because, and this is why I'm really optimistic for you becoming First Minister and indeed for Keir becoming Prime Minister, if you've had to exercise strategic judgment in the leadership of your party in the period preceding government, it's like a muscle that you learn to exercise. So they had the experience of making big strategic calls about changing and improving the Labour Party's offer even before they got to Whitehall. And in that sense, the kind of leadership you're showing just now, the leadership that Keir's showing, I have no doubt at all that if you are given the privilege of being the First Minister of Scotland, you'll have the experience, the smarts and the knowledge to do it. Now, I dealt very closely with Gordon and Tony in those early days. I distinctly remember I was on the Friday after the 1997 election. We had pagers in those days, that's how old I am. And I got a pager message saying, please call GB at HMT. And then there was a telephone number which turned out to be the Downing Street switchboard. I called the Downing Street switchboard for the first time in my life, and they said, we're just going to put you through to the Chancellor. So Gordon said, listen, we're going to do an emergency budget on the 2nd of July. You've written speeches with me for years. I need your help writing the budget. Can you get free? So I was working at the time just along the road in Alban Place for Digby Brown, the law firm. And I was Labour's candidate in Perth, as some might remember, in 1997. I like to say that I fought Perth for Labour. Truthfully, Perth fought back pretty effectively. So I had promised my law firm, I said, give me a leave of absence, because on the Monday morning after the general election, I promise you, I will be back at my desk. So on that Monday morning, I'm back at my desk, sitting with my files, and suddenly, that was the day, incidentally, that at 8 o'clock in the morning, Gordon raised interest rates for the only time in his chancellorship, because at 11 o'clock, he announced the operational independence of the Bank of England. In between those two momentous events, I'm sitting in Alban Place along the road, and the senior partner of the law firm bursts into the office and says, you have no idea who has just phoned me. I knew exactly who had just phoned him. I said, who's that? And he said, probably the second most important man in the country. It was Gordon Brown. He says he needs your help writing the budget. So I said, go, the country needs you. So on the Tuesday after the 1997 election, I had a desk in the Treasury, and we together wrote that budget that was delivered in July the 2nd. The truth is, having that inordinate privilege of working with these towering Labour figures confirmed to me that actually, once you get into to be First Minister of Scotland, your job is not to stop being a politician, it's to continue being a politician. Working with them in those early years of the Labour government, the two ministers who I knew who had the most unallocated time in their diaries were Tony Blair and Gordon Brown, because they understood intuitively their job was to continue to be Labour politicians and not just become administrators of their red boxes. And in that sense, I'm really optimistic, both about the job you can do and the job that Keir can do, because at root, you're politicians and you're good politicians. And that would be my advice if we're given the privilege of office, which is don't forget the values that took us there. And once you get the opportunity, that's when the real work starts, because you're able to not make speeches, but you're able to make policies that change people's lives.
I was going to say, Douglas, you need to stop talking because you're giving me goosebumps in terms of the tickle of excitement of government, so thank you for that. Joni, Kirsty mentioned around culture wars and the toxicity of politics. Let's be honest, for young women in particular, and for young families, that is an environment that doesn't really feel like it's welcoming. And for people to be brave enough to run towards that, despite those challenges, I think says something extraordinary about those individuals. So despite that toxicity, what does it mean for you as a young woman and someone with a young family to be saying, you know what, I'm going to step up here because I really believe in this?
I mentioned before that, Labour Party having to come in and clean up the mess that the Tories keep making. Well, I'm far more worried about my children's future and your children's future and all our kids' future than our parents were ever worried about ours, and I really believe that. And so the only vehicle that can ensure that our children have as many opportunities as we had is is a Labour Party. So yeah, it's toxic at times, but we've got to do it. And Kirsty said that it's okay to disagree, and I think that will be my message, and I'll make sure that I take it across the constituency to all parts, not just where we know we're strong. And I'll continue to really listen to people. It's great, the polls are looking really good, but I won't be listening to the polls. I'll be listening to people on the doorstep, having a genuine conversation with them, and there will be times where I'll have to say, yeah, it's okay to disagree, but ultimately, we are in the Labour Party committed to you, we're committed to your community, and we're committed, we're hardworking, we're competent, and we've got everything to gain and nothing to lose from a Labour government. So I'm just going to take that message out, and whatever toxicity comes at me, I'll just need to. Someone said yesterday, you need to grow the skin of a rhinoceros or something like that. So we'll just have to keep going.
You won't need to. You'll have lots of people backing you in that contest as well. So thank you, Joni. Torkel, we often think about. I think we often fall in the trap of our politics being very city-focused, urban-focused, thinking about the great centres of power either being London, or the great centres of power either being Edinburgh, or indeed I would say, I'm biased this way, Glasgow. But what does it mean? How disconnected does and how remote does Holyrood and Westminster feel to our island communities? Because we often hear about how disconnected the House of Commons feels, but I would imagine, how disconnected do you feel, for example, to Holyrood and to Westminster if you live in our island communities?
Well, very, if you're talking about ferries, yeah. And let's not go there.
So let's go there.
But it's quite interesting, having had PMQs as the focus of your professional week and personal week, and FMQs the following day. No disrespect, but on a Thursday afternoon in Stornoway, no one's really talking about it. Or on a Wednesday afternoon, they're talking about the cost of living, the ferries, the price of energy, heating their homes, everyday issues. So yeah, politics does seem a bit far away, but obviously quite a few people are well aware of their politics. And politics in that sense isn't remote. People see the Western Isles, it must be a different rural, remote. It's not really, it's a kind of a bellwether seat. I see, you've got to remember, the Western Isles was a Labour seat for most of the 20th century. It then went SNP when the SNP rose in the 70s. Before New Labour, it kind of foreshadowed New Labour. It went Labour in 87 rather than 97. And then it fell back the SNP before 2007, 2010. It should have been that tinkling bell in 2005 saying something's up. We've lost a seat. We lost a seat we shouldn't have lost. And in that sense, it's, you go there and you fight the battle of the aisles, as I've been doing for the last 5 weeks. And I mean the supermarket aisles, not the aisles themselves. You walk up and down there, and people have come up to me, glad you're standing, glad, local boy, that's great, I love that. But people came up and said, we need change, we need change, we need change. It just chimed and chimed and chimed. And you get rid of your kind of bias and you think, this isn't just me, this, all through January, people came up, well done, glad you're standing, we need change, we need change. And that kind of chime came through this week. It came through in Nicola Sturgeon's resignation, it came through in the changing polls, and came through in the feeling in this conference hall that change is coming. So in that sense, Western Isles were at the forefront. You could taste it, you could lift your finger to the wind 4 or 5 weeks ago in Stornoway and think, people are hungry for change, and we're here, we have to give them that opportunity.
And he's still a Point FC fan as well.
Red's the colour, red's a winning colour.
A simple question for all of you is, what does a Labour government mean to you and to the community you want to serve? Kirsty.
So I think there's two risks for Labour that I see going into this election. One is that the Tories are going to try and box us in and say, see, to be fiscally credible, you have to back austerity. And the SNP are going to try and back us in and say, you're the party of the status quo. When you talk about the union, you're really talking about defending the status quo. No one in this room joined the Labour Party to promote austerity or to defend the status quo. We all joined this party to transform this country, make it fairer, more equal, bring social and economic justice. And when I think about the conversations I've had in Midlothian over the last month, as Torkel says, people are so hungry for change. When I talk to mums that say, do you know what, when my kid's nappy gets dirty, I just tip it in the bin and put it back on because I can't afford more. When we are talking about Scottish kids that have been hospitalised with malnutrition, none of us are going to rest. That's what a Labour government means, that we're not going to deal with people who cannot afford nappies, people who have to take their kids to hospital because they're so damn hungry. When we are talking to people who say, do you know what, I've turned up at Save the Children's Service, I've turned up at a food pantry, I've turned up at a community centre, and I'm sorry. That's the thing that people said to me most often throughout last year, was they said, Hen, I'm sorry I'm here. I'm sorry I'm here. I never thought I'd be the kind of person that would need to go to a charity to feed my family. And I just think, you haven't failed your children. We have all failed your children. We've all failed your children. If we as a society have allowed an economy to be structured such that hard-working people doing double shifts, nurses, are going to food banks to feed their families, and none of us can rest, right? That's a damning indictment on our society, and it's a damning indictment of our party that we've been out of power so long and allowed that to happen. No more. Fight Back starts today.
I'd say a couple of things. I think, firstly, a different tone to our politics, and Anas, you've really led the way in this. I really, really want a government that brings us together rather than pulls us apart. And we've had a nationalist government here that's business model in politics has been constant division, and we've got a Conservative government who literally don't know how to do politics other than exacerbating inequality. So, listen, I thought long and hard before coming back. I don't look forward to the cyber warriors of Twitter or any other social media, but I think we've got a responsibility collectively to give expression to a different way of doing politics. And in that sense, that's why I really relish the opportunity to have those face-to-face conversations in East Lothian in the coming months, because it is about how do we do politics as well as what does politics do for people. On that second point of what does politics do for people, I want to win because of our Labour values, not despite our Labour values. And in that sense, what are the core values that we believe in? It's not just a sense of togetherness and a sense of unity, but it's also a fundamental belief in solidarity. You know, what brought the labour and trade union movement together historically was a sense of shared vulnerability. That actually, if you are in a workplace, you are stronger in a union. I still believe that, notwithstanding the horrors of this Tory government, on this island, you are stronger in a union. And actually, tragically, because of Brexit, we are being shown every day that you're stronger on a continent if you're part of a union. So in that sense, I think there is a real opportunity for us, not just to change the tone, but to give practical expression to the difference that Labour can make. And I think that's honestly quite a hard lesson for those of us who lost in 2015, which is that in 2014, a lot of people we'd regarded as our natural supporters came to see independence as a way of improving the prospects for themselves, their families and their communities. We need to hear that, and we need to respect, we don't need to agree with it, but we need to respect the sincerity with which they made that choice. The way that I'm really excited about what difference a Labour government could make is we can show them, we don't need to tell them, we can show them that a Labour government is going to improve their opportunities, their families' opportunities, and the opportunities for their communities. And in that sense, I think Torkel's right. I think change is coming, but that's a heavy responsibility on every one of us in this room, because ultimately we're going to have to show that there is a faster, safer, and better way to get change in communities across Scotland than the kind of magic door of independence that people have believed in for the last few years.
Yeah. Thank you, Douglas. Tony?
So I've been part of the leadership of a Labour-run administration down south for 8 years, and I've seen the difference that Labour makes, because fundamentally, in every decision that we make, at the heart of it is what protects people, what protects the most vulnerable and the most disadvantaged in our communities. And that really matters. So we have, I think, mitigated where we do have power, mitigated rather than compounded the Tory cuts, whereas the SNP have really gone for it, and they have made it worse than ever. And with that extra layer of SNP administration, they've decimated so many communities. So I think that with a Labour in power, we know what it can bring. Values, mitigating the impact of cuts, building communities, and that's exactly what I think we'll do when we get into power.
Thank you, Johnny. Torkel?
Well, I turn the question on its head and first of all, not ask what can a Labour government do for the Western Isles, but what can the Western Isles do to get a Labour government? And people are hungry for change, people want change, and they want Keir Starmer to be the Prime Minister. And I say, well, if you want that, you have to vote for that. You have to make this a Labour seat in order to get a Labour government. And early on in election night, when that strip goes red, when we go red in the Western Isles, that'll be the Atlantic beacon. That'll be the landing lights for the lights going on in Downing Street for Keir Starmer in the morning. And I tell people that if they want change, we've given them the opportunity for change. And what we'll do is we'll plug the edge of the world, the edge of Britain, right into the heart of a Labour government. That'll change everyone's lives from one end of the country to the other.
Now, it's really interesting. All four of you have very different perspectives and really different experience in terms of Labour campaigning and Labour argument making, Labour election framing. What lessons can you share with us as a wider audience as well around how we can strengthen that campaign to the next general election, what it means at a local level or indeed at a national level? Any of those lessons?
Well, I think I asked when you were asking Joni about toxicity, the thing that was coming to my mind was, it is going to be toxic. Of course it's going to be toxic because they're in the fight of their lives, because they've got nothing else to run on. So it is going to be brutal. But one thing I always try and remember is, like, if you don't fight, you can't win. So it's better to fight. It is always, always, always better to be in the fight. And the more folk we speak to, the more they vote for us. So people, I think, in politics often look for, is there an innovation? Is there something from America that could magically win this election for us? And the answer is, like, of course we should have modern campaigning techniques. Of course we should have data. Of course we should use digital. Of course we should have fantastic design. Of course we should do all of that. But elections in the end do come down to the more folk you speak to, the more they vote for you. If you have an offer, if you have an offer that will change their lives. One of the only things I think that's different about this upcoming election than in the past, we've often in the Labour Party talked about winning the politics of ideas and winning the politics of organisation, and we absolutely need to do both those things. But there's a third element, which is winning the politics of emotion. And by that, I do not mean manipulating people or using some of the techniques of our political opponents to drive anger and emotion and to heighten the emotion of the election. But we do have to let people know that we're not just on their side, but by their side. And those of us who've been for selection in the last little while will know that keek from behind the curtain of somebody going, oh God, there's somebody with a rosette on my doorstep. And you can see them going, I'm just going to turn up the telly and pretend I didn't hear the bell. Right? And that's our people, right? Those are members of the Labour Party who are saying, I'm not sure I really want to answer the door and have a conversation about politics at the moment. And if that's true of our members, it's definitely true of our voters. And the reason they've come to that conclusion is because historically their experience in the last period of having a Labour person on their doorstep is we want to talk to them about us. We want to say, are you going to back me? Are you supporting me? What are you giving to me? And actually we need to reverse that completely and have an emotional conversation with the public that says, see, when you're in trouble, I am right here by your side. See it in the face of this cost of living emergency. See it in the face of these absolutely savage cuts that are coming across councils, including in Midlothian. We are right here linking arms with you, and we are not going to let a single family go under. That is the point of Labour politics, is to be rooted in communities alongside people in their struggles and saying we get through this together or not at all. So I think this election, yes, of course, ideas, of course, organisation, but we need to have a new emotional contract with people that says, I'm not here to talk about my job. the job I want. I don't want a new job. I love my job, right? I'm not here primarily because politics is my career. I'm here because politics is my calling. It's the calling of public service, as I say, to be with people at their most difficult times and say not a single one of you, if we have anything to do with it, is going under in this cost of living emergency. We are going to fix it. You just need to hold on because that change is coming.
I was talking to the media editor of The Guardian who said the next election is going to be a TikTok election. Are we going to see Douglas Alexander dancing in some TikToks before the next election?
Confession time, trying to sound young and hip and modern. In my long-listing interview with Jackie Bailey, I said the challenge is that people over 40 are on Facebook and people under 40 are all on TikTok. So of course it's going to be essential in East Lothian that we have a campaign on TikTok. And Jackie just laughed at me and she said, I'm really looking forward to your TikTok video. So I'm not sure whether it's likely that I would increase the Labour vote or decrease the Labour vote. I certainly cannot compete with your dancing and ass. But it's a serious point. In my pocket, like most of us, we've all got a phone. You were kind enough to mention that I've been doing some teaching over at Harvard. Very famously, the congressional representative for Cambridge, Massachusetts, in the 80s was a guy called Tip O'Neill. He became the Speaker of the House of Representatives, and he was the great sparring partner of the Republican President Ronald Reagan, because he was the Democratic Speaker of the House of Representatives. He had an aphorism for which he was famous, which is all politics is local. And actually, I was at a conference in the States relatively recently where one of the speakers said, Tip O'Neill said all politics is local. What's really changed in American politics because of these things, because of smartphones, is that all politics is national. And if you're running to be dog catcher in rural Ohio, they're as likely to be interested in whether you're a spear carrier for Joe Biden or Donald Trump as they are in whether you can catch dogs. And in that sense, that's why I agree with what Kirsty says, and indeed the fact that you've established a profile on TikTok and elsewhere, which is we need to be everywhere. And in that sense, we don't want bad websites of people pointing at potholes that nobody ever visits. It's a kind of build it and they will come mentality that's completely wrong. We need to go where people are at. And that might be, in that community, as Kirsty says, I have a lot of experience of standing on a Labour doorstep with a rosette. But if your first encounter with a voter is a transactional one, I'm here and I hope you're going to vote for me, that's a completely different kind of politics from what we believe in, which is a relational politics, that we have a covenant rather than a contract with Labour voters, and we journey with you, and we're part of the community and of your lives, and at some point we will ask you to give us your support, but we'll have established a relationship of trust and credibility long before that. So we need all of that face-to-face work, but we can't afford not to be on people's phones as well as on people's doorsteps. And let's be honest, over recent years, the SNP have been formidably good at online campaigning. And in that sense, that's why I think we need a full spectrum offer. We need to be everywhere people are engaging in their politics. And these days, that means being on phones as well as being on doorsteps, but most fundamentally, journeying and walking with and representing the community you aspire to be part of.
Absolutely. I wasn't sure whether you're having a go directly at Councillor Scott Arthur for his pothole pictures on Twitter, but I'm sure
his best seat on the bus, which is a daily fare for me,
exactly,
is a tribute.
Exactly. So keep doing those local campaigns about the potholes as well. I'm not sure that was the point. Joni, what about yourself? Any?
I'm really heartened actually during the selection campaign. You speak to a lot more people than you usually do. And yes, of course, social media is toxic. It brings out the very worst in people. It brings out the very worst in good people, as well as people with quite terrible motives. But when you actually speak to people and have a genuine conversation where you're listening to their concerns, most people are really nice, actually. And just stay away as much as you can. Yeah, you've obviously got to have a digital campaign. But the more people you speak to, the more hopeful I think you become about people and the impact that we can have with a Labour government working together with communities. But absolutely, you know, the path to a Labour government is through the streets, I think, alongside a good digital campaign. But as long as we kind of keep knocking on those doors, keep having really good conversations with people, and that you realise actually that they are sick as well of the endless constitutional warfare, and they really now want to focus on what matters to them, and that's no matter where they sit across the political spectrum. So I'm feeling quite positive about it when we've got our messaging right.
Excellent. And James Kelly, we're really happy. There's lots of endorsement for chapping doors and getting out in the streets, James. You'll be really happy to hear that. Torquil, what about yourself? Obviously, one of the things about the way we campaign, we don't often think about language. We don't think about how that tone, either the language itself or the tone of that language, impacts on our island communities. Any insights around that?
I think tone is more important than whichever language you speak. And I get what people are saying about the toxicity of online, but I try and turn that into positive. We were there first. You know, the horrible experience of 2014 came as a shock to people in the Brexit campaign in London in 2016. I thought, what's going on? I said, we've been through all this, you know? We know what this is. So we're a lot more resilient, a lot tougher than we look, because we've battled hard into that, you know? So I wouldn't worry too much about that. Just get on with doing the job, get engaged. I think the key theme is, in either online or offline or on people's doorsteps, is respect. Lots of my neighbours, lots of my lifelong friends are SNP voters, and they believe in independence. But I'm not going to spend the next 2 years arguing about independence. I've spent the last 10 years arguing about independence. We've got nowhere, absolutely nowhere. Scotland's going backwards, not forwards. So we have to find a language and a tone where we have to respectfully agree to disagree on that question and find out what we have in common, whether that be the F word, ferries, or education, or health services. Well, people are beyond anger. You don't have to talk to people about ferries in the Western Islands. They're just beyond anger on it. They're just in despair about it. But we have to find these issues of commonality. And I think the winner in Scotland is the person who unifies. I think that's where Sturgeon went wrong in 2015. She deepened the divisions rather than healed the wounds. And I think if we do that, if we're the people who try and unify and try and respect differences, but find a common cause and a common road, I think that's how we'll win.
Excellent. Thank you, Paul. Last question. Last question then, which is, look, it's fair to say it's been a tough time in the Scottish Labour Party for many, many years, but it feels different this time. And it's also, I think, fair to say that COVID has made it much harder, I think, to get the activists on the ground. What work can we do in individual constituencies to build those local teams, to build that activism to win the next election?
I think you've got to have something worth fighting for, and now we do. One of the things I've often said to you and asked is, one of the things that's changed in the Scottish Labour Party is you look like you're having a good time, right?
I'm enjoying it. Just don't ask me to dance.
But you look like you like speaking to the electorate, and you look like you want to hear their stories, because we do. And that whole tone of our politics has been transformed by you and Jackie. And so I think our members will feel that enthusiasm, because they want their neighbours to be doing better. And this is the thing that I found really interesting speaking to folk across Scotland in the last few months is, you see, even people that are doing really quite well, folk in big houses, they do not want to be doing well at their neighbours' expense. Like, they hate the inequality in Scotland. They hate it. They hate the social injustice that surrounds them. They know, they feel that pull that Douglas was talking about, that pull of solidarity and that pull of being part of a community. And that's as true of our voters as it is of our members. They've got something worth fighting for now. They believe that we can win, but crucially, they believe that winning is worth doing. And that's one of the key things. It's not enough to say we want to be in government. We have to say why. And you gave us the building blocks of that on Friday. As I say, I know we're about to hear more from Keir Starmer, but this is a fight worth winning, and it's one that we can win, and I think that's what's going to inspire our members the most.
Excellent. Douglas?
Honestly, I think we've got to take care of each other, and I really couldn't echo more of the point that Torquil made. We've had a tough few years. Let's have no doubt how tough it's been to be a Labour Party activist. But the truth is, we've not always been great at looking after each other in that fight. And I think, you know, if you turn up on a Sunday to deliver leaflets, all too often in the Labour Party, it's like, well, why weren't you here on Saturday? And actually, maybe people have got childcare responsibilities, or they're looking after elderly parents or whatever. I think actually we need to model the kind of country that we aspire to govern. And in that sense, that means looking out for each other and also recognising that all of us are better than any of us. The truth is, I've just lived that in the selection in East Lothian. The real reason that I was selected in East Lothian was that really, really good, decent people gave me the benefit of the doubt and said, Douglas is all right. It wasn't me who won it, it was my supporters who won it, having the conversations after we'd been on the doorsteps, after we'd been making the phone calls, and that's a lesson for us in how we fight a general election as well. We need more third-party endorsers than are gathered in this hall, and in that sense we need to treat everybody with respect, we need to take care of each other, and we need to give the benefit of the doubt to everybody, because the culture that we have as a party actually matters a lot in whether people are willing to give us the trust of running this country. And Anas, in that sense, you've done a power of work in a remarkably short period of time in rebuilding that culture, and we will be right behind you in that endeavour.
Johnny?
I think from your speech the other day, we've got the right message in, and we've got a vision that I think people can buy into. But we've got to make sure that we create the right culture locally, as Douglas said, in the way, and it sounds like quite a nebulous term, and that's really about how you behave. And you've got to be welcoming, you've got to be kind, you've got to no-nonsense kind of attitude, and just be inclusive and work across the party and try and bring people together. But that's really about, I think, about being welcoming and kind. I think it's that simple and that easy. And if you do that with the right messaging, with the right leader and vision, then I think everyone will want to get on board, won't they?
Torkel?
I hate to be the Pat McFadgen of the piece, but Pat wouldn't be mistaken for a ray of sunshine. I think he was
here yesterday. I'm glad he
was at the fringe. He was at the Labour Friends of Scotland fringe yesterday, and he pulled the balloons down off the ceiling. It has been a great weekend. It has been great polling. We are glad Nicola Sturgeon has gone away, but for Labour to win is going to be phenomenal. It's a big swing. It's a big swing where I'm going to stand. I don't take that for granted. The challenge is, it's just going to need a lot of work from here to election day, and we shouldn't forget that. We shouldn't be complacent for a second. I'm sure that's a message we get.
Before we wrap up, I wanted to just say one last thing before we move on, and that is, I think people can see a sense that there's a change of feel in the air, a change of mood in the air, and a different vibe in the air. But we can't be complacent about that. We've got to go out there and earn people's trust and confidence. So I just want to make one plea to everybody as they leave this conference hall later on this afternoon, is I want you to stand that little bit taller than you stood a week ago. I want you to broaden your shoulders a little bit wider than you did a week ago, and go out there with confidence. Don't leave it to one individual or leave it to one team. Go out there and make the case to win the future. And if we do it, we can come back and celebrate a Labour government across the UK, and I believe a Labour government here in Scotland as well. Thank you. And I'd ask for one just final applause for Kirsty, Douglas, Joni, Torkel, and all our phenomenal candidates for all the efforts they're putting in. Let's make these future Labour MPs in a Labour government.
Thank you to Anas and our panel. I'd like to encourage everyone to make sure that they leave conference. There's campaigning this afternoon in Ballgreen, but use every opportunity to get Labour's message out to the voters in the months ahead. Conference, we're now going to have a very short break. I'd ask you to stay in your seats to allow the panel to change, the stage to be set up, so that we can be ready to hear from our keynote speaker in a few minutes. Can I ask people to take their seats, please? Conference. Can you please now welcome the Vice Chair of Scottish Young Labour, Cara McDade, to the rostrum.
Conference. It's an honour to be here in Edinburgh with you all today. My name is Cara McDade and I'm a young member from Blantyre and Vice Chair of Scottish Young Labour. Conference. Scottish and all of Britain needs a Labour government. As a young person, I know that we can build a brighter future for the next generation. Young people are hopeful for the future of Scotland and the UK, but we know that we need a Labour government in Edinburgh and London to build the brighter future that we all need. This weekend, Anna Sarwar and Jackie Baillie have laid out a bold vision of a fairer and greener Scotland. Scottish Labour is on the side of change because it is on the side of the Scottish people. Scottish Labour is on your side. Labour can boot the Tories out of government at Westminster and boot the SNP out of Holyrood. Only Labour can unite our country. Only Labour can clean up our politics and build a Britain that works for all and end nearly a decade and a half of Tory failure. Only Labour can build a Scotland that works for all, and to do that we need to put Keir Starmer into number 10. Conference. It is my honour to introduce the next Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, Sir Keir Starmer. Ladies and gentlemen, Sir Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Conference. Thank you, Conference. It is absolutely fantastic to see you all here, and the energy and buzz about this conference is phenomenal. And thank you, Cara, for that brilliant introduction. And I have to say, for making the rest of us feel so old. Cara is only 18 years old. Isn't that fantastic, Cara? Well done. And Conference, as you may have seen, I came here via Ukraine, which wasn't the quickest journey, I have to say. But it was an important visit, and a humbling visit, to have the opportunity to meet President Zelensky in Kyiv and say directly to him and the Ukrainian people that should there be a change of government next year, the support for Ukraine will remain the same. But also to go into the outskirts of Kyiv and meet some of the communities that were hardest hit in the early days of the conflict, to see the damage, to see the atrocities, but to see them get up every day, go to work, mend whatever is broken, and show through their own resilience that they will not be broken by Russia. I found that resilience and that courage really, really humbling. And we stand with Ukraine today, and we stand with them forever until they defeat Russia. And conference, in that spirit, can I thank you for the solidarity you've shown this weekend towards the victims of the terrible earthquakes in Turkey and Syria. I can only imagine, we can all only imagine what those families are going through. And I speak, I know, for all of us when I say our thoughts are with them. But the support that you've provided to people here in Edinburgh and communities across the United Kingdom, that is the best of our movement. So thank you so much for that. And Anas, thank you again for your leadership, your energy. You and everybody in this room have given Labour back its confidence here in Scotland. And conference, Anas and I have something in common, and it's not our football team. It's the fact that when we took on our leadership roles, people said the same thing to both of us. Good luck, but you're never going to do it. Well, conference, let me tell you, I know that together we can prove them wrong. Thank you, Anas. Well, what a difference a year makes. 4 chancellors, 3 prime ministers, 2 ferries still missing, and 1 rock star endorsement. That's right, conference. Rod Stewart is voting Labour. We're finally reaching out to the Scots who grew up on the mean streets of North London. But conference, seriously, it's been a long, hard road to this point. But this is a new era for Scotland and for Britain. The tide is turning on the Tories and the SNP. Now, Anas is right to thank the First Minister for her service, and I will do the same. To lead Scotland for almost a decade is a political achievement that must be acknowledged. And one thing we need to be clear about, wherever you stand on the constitutional issue, we must respect those beliefs as a sincere desire to make the future better for Scotland. The First Minister was sincere about that, and it shaped her service to this nation. And yes, it shaped her political success. A success grounded, let's be brutally honest, in persuading people who used to vote Labour to support her cause. Conference, we've got to reach out to those people now. There will be people in all of your communities looking again at the future of Scotland with fresh eyes. And we have to meet their gaze with confidence. Show them not just what the Tories and the SNP have done to this nation, but the Scotland that Labour can build. A fairer, greener, more dynamic Scotland in a fairer, greener, more dynamic Labour Britain. But conference, mark my words, we won't change any hearts or minds by sitting back and watching a battle for power within the SNP, or by assuming that any weakening of faith in their case automatically benefits us. We have to go out there and earn it, prove we can understand the real concerns of the Scottish people, that we've listened to the reasons those voters lost faith in Labour and Britain, and that we now offer the solutions that Scotland needs. It's not about top It's not about change at the top of other political parties. It's about the changes we've made to our own and the changes that we can now deliver for the Scottish people. And that's the value of the steps we've already taken together. And don't underestimate them. Change with a purpose, to make our Labour Party fit to serve our country. That's why we had to show our support for NATO is non-negotiable. Understand the importance of sound money. Tear anti-Semitism out by its roots. Country first, party second. That's the foundation that we've laid together. As John Smith said, the chance to serve is all we seek. The job now is to set out what that means for Scotland and Britain. And I feel that for too long we've been stuck in a brace position, buffeted from crisis to crisis. I mean, look around the country now. Look around Scotland. Families, pensioners, working people, people who've always kept their heads above water, going without decent food or heating. That's no way to live. And it's no way to run a country. People want decisive leadership, want a bold reforming government, want change that's a credible response to the challenges that they face. Because amidst all the chaos of the Tory and SNP rule, there is a growing impatience for change, for national renewal. Working people are tired of an economy that only works for those at the top. They want public services that can provide security and a springboard for opportunity. And they despair of broken politics, which can't provide their community with the tools to control their destiny. This is the change that Scotland needs, that Britain needs. And as in 1945, when we built a land fit for heroes out of the rubble of the Second World War, in 1964, when we harnessed the white heat of technology to pay our way in a changing world, in 1997, when we modernised a country held back by crumbling public services and outdated institutions, Labour must rise to the moment and provide it again. Conference, that's the scale of our challenge. But we have to find a new way, a different way. Chart a fresh course towards a better future. Now, we could talk all weekend about Labour's history in this nation, or about Scotland's success in the UK, its leadership on renewable energy, its vital contribution to British security, its cultural brilliance and spirit of innovation, all achieved within this union. All achieved by the solidarity, hope, and idealism of working people. But Conference, let's face facts. Many Scots, like Cara, don't remember a time before devolution, let alone our achievements in the last century. We can't run on our history. We can only run on the change we offer Scotland now. That goes for the union as well. I don't believe in our union just because of our history. I believe in it because of our future. Look at the great challenges we face. Cost of living crisis, climate change, standing up to Putin. They're common across our nations. And sticking up a border doesn't solve any of them. But we must accept that for many Scots, they look at Tory Britain and conclude the way out is the way forward. And Conference, that's the argument we have to take on now. And that's why today I want to address those who've given up on Labour directly. And yes, those who've given up on Britain. I know the people of Scotland want change and hope. Not a showy, grandiose hope. I don't mean that. No, what I mean is the basic, ordinary hope that we used to take for granted. The sort of hope you can build your future around, that aspirations are made of, that was shared by working people across our 4 nations in good times and in bad. The hope that people in Scotland are once again looking to see if Labour can offer. Now, I go back to my childhood on this. I grew up working class in the 1970s. I know what a cost of living crisis feels like. The anxiety and, the shame of not being able to pay bills, which only months ago were affordable. Our phone was cut off like this. And by the way, that was it then. There were no mobile phones. Once it was cut off, it was gone. But although we had our ups and downs, the one thing my parents never doubted was that things would get better. That there was always that deeper hope invested in us, in our future, in Britain, that felt secure, stable, dependable. It's more than a British value. It's what we tell our children. Work hard and you can achieve anything. Work hard and you'll get a fair chance in Britain. And look, my parents didn't just believe this. It comforted them. But is it still true? I don't think so. I think many Scots have stopped believing. Absolutely. That's the deeper cost of Tory Britain. A growing sense hard work isn't rewarded. That the bonds which tie us together, community to community, across our 4 nations, have been allowed to unravel. That our children won't be better off than us. Conference, this is what drives me. I don't want anyone in Britain to feel like this about their future. Now, that's not just words for me. It's the story of my life, the journey that I've been on. But it's also the story of our union. Because the case for the union has always rested, on the solidarity of working people, pushing Britain forward in search of that ordinary hope. But when families worry like this about their children's future, when hard work no longer guarantees fair reward, or even that your contribution is respected, then yes, that case becomes harder to make. Conference, that's what we're fighting for in our country. We need to meet the forces of division with renewed hope every day. And not just in Scotland. I want to be Prime Minister for the UK, not just Prime Minister of the UK. And that's why I've always said the path to Labour victory must run through Scotland. So we need to raise our sights, create a collective sense of mission across our home nations. It's the only way to get that sense of hope, of possibility, of solidarity back. But we can't delude ourselves. Change must be credible. Now, working people have had enough of false promises to last their lifetime. But that means politics of ordinary hope will be hard. Hard because of the damage the Tories have done to Britain. Hard because of the damage the SNP have done to Scotland. Hard because of the damage they've both done deliberately to the prospects of our future together. Let me start with the Tories. Where do you begin? The pain they've inflicted to our economy and public services, to our reputation around the world, to our NHS and public services, it's immense. They're not capable of the change that Britain needs. And as for the cynicism of what they'll do at the general election, to try and claim political credit for the sacrifices working people are making now, it beggars belief. But Conference, whoever ends up in charge of the SNP, It's not as if they can give the Tories any lectures on political responsibility. Over 15 years in power, and what do they have to show for it? Honestly, it's always somebody else's fault. And the reason is simple. They're not truly invested in Scotland's success. Anything Scotland achieves within the UK is met with gritted teeth, seen as a roadblock to the one true goal. And so they do nothing. That's why standards in education are going backwards. Why the tragedy of Scottish drug deaths hasn't been gripped. Why they haven't just accepted Tory cuts to local services, but piled on the misery. If it's not about the Constitution, they're not interested. And Conference, we can never work with that. So whatever happens in the coming months, my message is the same. No deal under any circumstances. And Conference, the phony offers of support can end now. The blame game can end now. The unspoken political bond between the SNP and the Tories, the shared investment in division, that ends now. The change Scotland needs is coming. A Labour government is coming. But Conference, those Scots who lost faith in Britain, they have a point about Westminster. Britain has an economy that hoards potential and a politics which hoards power. And these two problems feed off each other. No similar country puts so much decision-making in the hands of so few people. And that leads to greater inequality across our country than anywhere else in Europe. It's no coincidence. I'm utterly convinced about this. Economic reform and political change must go hand in hand. Now, I came into politics late in my life. I've run large organisations, institutions that had to serve our country. And I've changed them all, including the Labour Party. That's why I came into politics 8 years ago. A new way to serve, a new way to get things done, more opportunities to change our country for the better. But as a system, without reform, Westminster can't deliver on that. Pick any of the current problems in Britain: energy security, productivity, the NHS. Honestly, we could be here all day, but it wouldn't matter. The pattern is always the same. Distracted by short-term obsessions, held back by a cynicism which uses low trust in politics as an excuse to narrow our ambitions, we lurch from crisis to crisis, always reacting, always behind the curve, a sticking plaster, never a cure. That's why every crisis hits Britain harder than our competitors. The only country in the G7 still poorer than before the pandemic. The worst decade for growth in 2 centuries. Millions on waiting lists and rising. That hasn't happened elsewhere. It's sticking plaster politics. And the harm it does to the prospect of bringing Britain together, to renewing the hope Scotland can move forward in Britain, is vast. So we've got to take it on. Only Labour can fix this. Only Labour can unlock the pride and purpose of all our communities, bring us together, raise our sights, nurture a real sense of collective mission, and drive us forward to the fairer, greener, more dynamic country I know that we can be. Britain needs a Labour government for any of this to happen. We all know that. And my message to the people across Scotland who want to see that kind of change is trust in us. There will be a clear choice at the next general election between more decline and division with the Tories or a credible change with Labour. Change for Britain that brings with it change for Scotland and your community. But I also want you to know, my Labour Party understands that this means we have to be in it for the long haul, that the change on the ballot in 2024 must last, must give people more power and resources to Scotland wherever and whoever is in power in Westminster. That's the change Scotland needs now. And to be honest, we don't just need more devolution in Scotland, we need it right across the United Kingdom. The argument is simple. The decisions which create wealth in our communities should be taken by people with skin in the game. A huge power shift out of Westminster can transform our economy, our politics, and our democracy. It's not unreasonable to think our economy should give working people a fair chance to succeed. It's not unreasonable to expect Westminster to recognise the desire for communities to stand on their own feet. Quite the opposite. It's the change Scotland and Britain need. Change which comes from unlocking the pride and purpose of communities everywhere, which spreads power and opportunity out of Westminster, puts people in control, and ends sticking plaster politics. A new approach to politics and democracy everywhere in Britain, built on a new approach to growth and our economy. Because, Conference, you can't overstate the importance of economic growth. It's the oxygen for our ambitions, the lifeblood of a strong society and a dynamic economy. But again, this will be hard. Every policy we announce must be fully costed. The lesson of the last year is stark. Lose control of the economy, and it's businesses and working people who pick up the bill. We can't let that happen, even when it puts a brake on things we might like to do in power. Sound money in our public finances must come first. But alongside it, we must be bold on reform, on reconstruction, on national renewal. That's what people expect from a Labour government, and we will deliver it. We will give working people growth from the grassroots, communities standing on their own feet, jobs that are well paid and secure. We'll end the Tory era of low pay with our New Deal for working people. Partner with business on a modern industrial strategy that will drive innovation, raise investment, harness the power of new technology and put it to the service of working people. And look, we will also seek to reset relations with the European Union. We will look to increase trade, reduce friction, fix the Brexit deal. That's a key part of raising our ambitions on economic growth, as is tackling climate change head on. Now, I come to this not just as leader of the UK Labour Party, but also as a dad. As a dad, I'm spurred on by the voices of our children, the cry of indignation demanding our generation act before it's too late. It's a matter of justice, about the fairness and better society that I came into politics to create. But it's also the biggest opportunity we've had in decades to make this country work for working people. Conference, this is why we need a collective sense of mission, of national renewal across our four nations. We've got to come together, write a new chapter in our national story about how our generation built a fairer, greener, more dynamic Britain by tackling the climate emergency and using it to create the jobs, the industries, the opportunities of the future. That's what our Green Prosperity Plan is all about. It's about turning the UK into a green growth superpower, investing in wind, solar, nuclear, hydrogen, green steel and carbon capture. Insulation for 19 million homes. And GB Energy, a new company that will take advantage of the opportunities of clean British power and turn them into good, secure, well-paid jobs. And yes, conference. Yes, conference. Because it's right for jobs, because it will help us to tackle climate change, GB Energy will be publicly owned. And let's be crystal clear about the benefits which flow to the Scottish people from this plan. Let's show how our Scottish businesses and families will get cheaper bills forever. How Scotland can get real energy independence from tyrants like Putin forever. And how we can give every community, from highlands to lowlands, islands to the central belt, a fair shot at the jobs and prosperity of the future. It won't be easy. We know that. But on planning, on fossil fuel power, on challenges to the grid, we not only see the battles ahead, we'll run towards them. Because there's nothing that reeks more of decline than the idea that Britain can no longer build things that benefit working people. It's exactly that kind of inertia our opponents in Scotland relish. I will never accept that. But let's be clear about this as well. You can't fix our economy without also fixing our NHS. You know, one of the great privileges of being born in Britain, certainly throughout all my life, is the knowledge that if you get ill, if you have a serious accident, you'll get decent health care, whatever your circumstances. Not every country has that, and the anxiety it causes is huge. But when you've got millions on waiting lists and rising, when you've got to fight tooth and nail to get a GP appointment, when you call an ambulance and it takes an age to get there, isn't that precisely where we are? Conference. Let me spell this out. Whether it's the SNP in charge or the Tories, we can't let sticking plaster politics destroy our NHS. I won't stand for that, and Labour won't stand for that. Make no mistake about who can deliver for the NHS now and in the future. You can look at our past. You can look at our present. But most of all, you can look at the SNP's record. And a new leader can't hide from this. It's the story of their time in power writ large. No reform, no change, excuse after excuse. The answer on the NHS is Labour. The answer to change in Scotland is Labour. And the answer to getting our hope, our pride, our future back in Scotland and in Britain is Labour. So, conference, reach out to your communities. Reach out to people who are looking at politics with a fresh pair of eyes, uncertain about what the future holds for Scotland. And let us speak to them with one voice. Let's say, we know that Scotland needs change. We know our economy needs to work better for working people, that our public services need to be fixed, that climate change needs bold action, and that our political system needs a total overhaul, with communities finally in the driving seat. None of this can be achieved through more division. But if you place your faith in Labour, this is the change we offer to you. to Scotland and Britain. The case for a new Britain, the case for change, a country where working people succeed, aspiration is rewarded, public services raise you up, communities control their own destination, climate change is defeated, politics is a force for unity and for good, a Scotland that is proud, confident, ambitious and successful, thriving in a fairer, greener, more dynamic Britain. A Britain where all our great nations rekindled the shared hope that can, as it has in the past, drive us towards a better future. That's the change we need. That's the chance we have. Thank you so much, Conference. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Conference, what a great speech to finish with. Can I now invite Scott Arthur, Vice Chair of the SEC, to the rostrum to give our vote of thanks.
Wow, how do I follow that? That was excellent, excellent. So thank you, Chair. Thank you very much. I'll keep this short because I know some of our Glasgow delegates want to look around Edinburgh before they go back to Scotland's second city. Thank you, thank you. So we've had a great conference, and as a councillor here in Edinburgh, I'm really proud that it's been hosted in Edinburgh. I've been a party member since 2014. I must have joined around the same time as Keir. We've had slightly different trajectories inside the party, I have to say. But I think by far this has been the best Scottish Labour conference I've attended. I think the organisation has been excellent, but I think it's the mood of optimism, I think, that's really rubbed off on me. I'm a little bit nervous about what's ahead of us, but I think it feels like we're close to a tipping point. And I think as both Anas and Keir have made clear, things are going to get harder as we get closer to power, but I think we're up for that fight, and I think we're ready to redouble our efforts and do what's needed. And the memory I'll take away from this conference goes back to the first morning. I was sitting right at the back beside somebody who had just retired from being a GP. And one of the first things that he did after he retired, just 3 months ago, was join the party. So we sat together listening to Jackie's excellent speech on health and social care in Scotland. And all the way through that speech, he applauded. He applauded particularly loud when Jackie was offering Hamza Youssef some constructive criticism, I have to say, and it looks like he's not listened to your advice. But I was sitting there thinking, isn't it fantastic that we've got people who have dedicated their life to the NHS, now joining our party and supporting our plans for health and social care. I mean, that gave me great confidence, if it was needed, in what Jackie was saying and our vision for Scotland if we gain power. So we've also had great speeches from Jackie, from Ian yesterday, and from Keir just a few minutes ago. But I think I also really enjoyed some of the speeches from our first-time speakers here at this podium, and also from our Westminster candidates. And what I'll say is if Keir wins power, and let's hope and pray that he does, I'm sure our candidates, if they're elected, won't be on the backbenches in Westminster. I'm sure they'll be part of the government and delivering the change. Delivering the change our country needs and is looking for. So conference would not have happened without the Conference Arrangements Committee, also known as CAC. And the door there says, for CAC, come this way, which is always quite interesting. So thanks to them, and thanks in particular to the chair, Aileen Dunning, for all that they have done under her leadership. And I would also like to thank the members of the Scottish Executive Committee. So I've been on the committee now for 6 years, and what I would say, there's been ups and downs, there's been highs and lows, but it's never been more united than it is now behind Anna's leadership. And it's the level and the nature of the discussions we're having just now are absolutely fantastic, because we know everything is up for grabs. It's fantastic. I'd also like to thank the volunteers at the conference over the last few days, the work they've done here and right through the year, and we know the party would be nowhere without them. And of course, I'd like to thank the staff here at the Assembly Rooms, a fantastic council-owned venue, the stewards who have kept us safe and in the right place at the right time, the technology team, which have kept everything running, which has been fantastic actually, and also the staff at the Conference Hotel, the Kimpton. The Kimpton is one of the very best hotels in Edinburgh, and I'm surprised some of the delegates could afford it, to be honest. But what I would say is they are really part of what we're trying to do as a Labour administration here in Edinburgh in terms of growing the tourist economy, but moving it up market. Better jobs, better paying conditions. They're a real critical friend in that journey we're on, so I was really pleased that the conference was partnering with them. We've had a great Fringe and exhibition, and I think the Fringe and exhibition is really the glue that holds the conference together. And I know a lot of people were out both Friday night and last night really soaking up the atmosphere in the Fringe, which was really good, really good. And of course, I'd like to thank the Scottish Labour Party staff, led very ably by James Kelly, for all they've done over the last 3 days, but in the hundreds of hours of effort in the weeks running up to this to get this event working as it did. And lastly, well, almost lastly, I'd like to thank all the members and delegates who have came along, everybody who spoke, everybody who took part in discussion. It's been a really positive and constructive event. It's filled me full of hope, but like I say, also a little bit of nervousness about what's ahead, but I'm sure we can get there, particularly if we listen to what Keir and Anna's was saying about redoubling our efforts. So lastly, what I want to say is we should never forget that our party is simply the political wing of the trade union movement. And I think and I really do believe that nobody exemplifies this more than our chair, Karen, who's so she's absolutely phenomenal, and I would also say formidable when needed. And I always have huge respect for her. So thank you, Karen, for all your efforts over the last few days. And I think we have flowers lurking somewhere for you. And I'll just say this very gently, the Labour Party is a party of equality. Next year, I hope to chair this conference, so I will expect flowers as well. Okay, I hope you all have a safe journey home, onwards and upwards, and let's get Keir elected, and then after that, Annis. Anything is possible, we work for it. Thank you.
thank you, Scott, for doing the vote of thanks, and thank you very much for your kind words. Can I just quickly echo Scott's sentiments and give my own thanks to all of our members, volunteers, staff, for the phenomenal amount of work and hard effort they put in for months before this conference. It wouldn't have been as successful as it has without them going above and beyond. So thank you to everyone. We've had, I'm sure you agree with me, a very successful conference. I've been a Labour Party member for 36 years. My first party conference was in Dundee in 1992. We thought we were on the verge of change at that point too, but we were disappointed. Let's learn a lesson from that. We don't want that same disappointment. Scotland needs change. We are the party of change. We've got so much work to do, but we can win together. After I adjourn conference for the final time, I am so pleased that we're going to be joined by Cathy Peaty, who will, in fine Scottish Labour Party tradition, lead us in the red flag. Conference. For the last time, conference is adjourned.
Thanks, Karen. It's a wonderful feeling standing here, watching all your comrades ready to sing the red flag. Now I've got a sore throat. The people's flag is deep as red. It shouted off our martyred dead, and ere their limbs grew stiff and cold, our heart blood dyed its every fold. Then raise the scarlet standard high. Beneath its shade we'll live and die. Though cowards flinch and traitors sneer, we'll keep the red flag flying here. With heads uncovered, swear we all to bear it onward till we fall. Come dungeons dark or gallows grim, the song shall be our parting hymn. Louder! They'll raise the scarlet standard high. Beneath its shade we'll live or die. Though cowards flinch and traitors sneer, we'll keep the red flag flying here.